We are so honored to welcome Michelle Gallen, and we're so honored to be with Jim Higgins, the conversation partner. And I'll just mention, if you like a Jim Higgins conversation, don't forget about Nick Petrie on January 12th. And we're even triple honored to be co-hosting this event with Celtic Milwaukee. Patrick Fitzgibbons is representing Celtic Milwaukee. He's going to say a few words while I mute myself.
Thank you, Daniel. It is a real pleasure to be here. Celtic MKE, the home of Milwaukee Irish Fest, very much likes to support our local booksellers, particularly when they bring in Irish authors.
So we, as I said, we are. This is an honor to be hosting Michelle Gallen, the author of Big Girl Small Town. She was born in County Tyrone and grew up during the Troubles. She studied English literature at Trinity College Dublin and won several prestigious prizes as a writer. Her debut was featured in the Washington Post with a rave review from Ron Charles, who complained that all the top 10s had already been made up before this book came out. So everybody should probably redo it so they can get this book in it. It did actually hit the top 10 editor's choice from Jim Higgins, the books and arts editor of the Journal Sentinel. And that very coveted spot is sort of what led to today's event. So welcome to Jim Higgins, welcome to Michelle Gallen, and thank you both for coming to converse.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for that effusive introduction. And thank you, Patrick, for Irish Fest supporting our event today. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. Have you ever been to America before?
Oh, I have. Yeah. I was first in America in 1988 when I was 13, and I spent 2 months. My mom sent me to America to see what life was like outside of the Troubles. I spent 2 months in New York.
Well, my job today is to ask all the dumb American questions of someone who actually lives in Ireland, as opposed to someone who lives in the Quiet Man. But first, explain your nationality to us. So you're from the North, but you live in Dublin now. How does that work?
So, well, I think nationality is complicated. Like my paternal grandfather is American, and my maternal grandfather was a British soldier. My dad was Irish born. My mom was born in London. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and I had an Irish passport, even though Northern Ireland is ruled by the UK, United Kingdom. And I currently live in Dublin with my French Moroccan husband and my English children. I can't explain it. I can just tell you how it is.
I'll save the Brexit questions for the end of our discussion today.
Brexit, oh yay.
But I think a lot of Americans don't realize how much great literature comes from Northern Ireland, from people, even the great names we can think of, including Samuel Beckett and Yeats, and we're all from the North. So what is it about the North that produces so many excellent writers like yourself?
I don't know. I think Ireland as an island produces really amazing writers. And I think Northern Ireland's kind of had a complicated position for years, because for a long time you had to write about the Troubles because that's what was happening and people expected to hear about the Troubles. And then the Troubles, we had a ceasefire, so then you weren't supposed to write about the Troubles, but nobody really knew what you were supposed to write about. So I think there was quite a period where you were told to kind of go away and hide in a hole somewhere. And in the past kind of 5 years or so, there's been a big turnaround again. I think if you look at Anna Burns's Milkman, and you look at the success of the kind of comedy, the sitcom Dairy Girls, which has been a massive hit, like it's cult hit, but it's a massive hit. And then things have turned around again. I think that it's okay to look at the Troubles again, to actually cite them in your book or in your TV series. But there's also a really strong crime writing community that comes from Northern Ireland. A lot of really good international crime writers write out of Northern Ireland and don't even use it as a scenario at all.
Yeah, and I should point out right away that the audiobook version of Big Girl Small Town is by one of the Dairy Girls.
It is. Nicola Coughlin plays, or she's one of the Dairy Girls, and she narrated Big Girl Small Town, and it was her very first audiobook, when we were incredibly lucky to get her when she had a tiny gap in her schedule, and she liked the book. She narrated it, and yeah, awesome. She does a brilliant job. So if anybody's kind of a bit, oof, what? I really think if you can get a copy of the book and listen to the first chapter of the audiobook, it gives you such a great kind of ear for how the accent is. She does a great job.
And from what I've seen, the BBC Sounds page has excerpts, and so it might be possible for folks to hear a little bit of it there too.
Yeah, they did an abridged version, where I think the abridgment may actually largely consist of them taking out many of the swear words to make it fit for the BBC audience, but you can still get a flavor of the book and the dialogue.
But it was not typecasting, because I think your characters would say that Nicola is a wee thing, right? Not a big girl like Magella. So.
She's not. She wouldn't be a handsome big woman now. She wouldn't have the heft of Magella, I would say. But Nicola does get the accent right. And another thing that she does a really great job out of, the book has tons of different characters, right? And Nicola somehow manages to give the mother all her flavor and her vitriol. And she brings all the characters who come in and out of the chipper, she brings them all alive, which I think is really, is quite an achievement, you know, to take a book with so many different characters and to give them all like a different flavor is astonishing.
Now, before we delve more deeply into Magella, I wanted to find out, how did you become a writer? When did you choose or decide or get impressed into writing? How did that happen?
It's a long old story, right? You know, because I'm mid-40s now and this is my book. When I was 14, I wrote a short story that went on and won a national British writing prize, a really big one. And from the age of about 14, I was writing a lot, and I was getting a lot of attention for my writing and winning prizes. And this continued till I was about 23. And when I was 23, I had contracted something called encephalitis, which left me with a brain injury. So I went from kind of living in London and living this life of, I was working in publishing, I was working as a copywriter, I was living my dream, and I was writing in the evenings to, I went home Christmas 1998 in a wheelchair, and, you know, I was living at home with my parents spoon feeding me and, you know, caring for me like I was a baby again. So from that point to writing Big Girl Small Town, oh my God, it was probably maybe 5 or 6 years of recovery and trying to get my life back. And I wrote the book then, and maybe 7 years. And then it took a long time to get the book picked up. As I say, the North was no longer fashionable, and it was not an easy sell. But things have changed, and Magella's hit the bookshelves.
So how did she come to you? Where did she come from?
Oh, so I was writing, because I had a brain injury and I had memory issues, I started back writing short stories, and I really wanted to write a novel, but I didn't trust my memory. Essentially, I had to write something that I could sit down in front of my computer and write the full thing in one go. So then I could come back and edit it. I was really scared if I tried to write a novel, I would write something and then literally not remember why was I writing that. So I'd written this short story called Double Tub, and it featured a chipper and this guy called Connor who worked in the chipper, and he was kind of unhappy and unfulfilled, and he had an alcoholic mother, he had a disappeared father, and the Daily Brother, basically the world was there. And when I finished the short story, I was like, oh, I don't want to leave this chipper and I don't want to leave this world. But I wasn't as excited about Connor as I kind of had this sensation that there was somebody else working in the chip shop with him, like this woman, and it was Magella, and she was a sort of big, strong woman. And I just knew I wanted to do the story from her viewpoint. So I sat down that November of that year and I wrote 70,000 words in a month. She was just there, and she wanted to be, I know she doesn't say much, like, you know, but her story wanted to be told.
And we should point out here that you're kind of a poster child for National Novel Writing Month, aren't you? Because you set out deliberately that month to write as much as you could on that story.
Yeah, NaNoWriMo, it was 50,000 words is what you had to hit, and I hit 70. But in fairness, I'm typical NaNoWriMo, I think, because it took me 3 years to finish it. So, you know, I could pour out most of the novel in that time, but then I went back to work and I went back to, you know, trying to earn a living and trying to hold all the different bits of my life together. So it took me 3 years to finish it, and then 10 years to find a publisher.
All right, once you delve back into that world with Magella, did you know where you were going with it? Or are you a make it up as you go along type of person? Or how does that
Often when I have a character, including even the small random sort of bit characters in my books or in my writing, I see all of their worlds. I don't know, it's like each of them are, it's like they're all planets, and I can jump into them in my head, and I could write a book about everyone. And I think my challenge is always trying to stay on point, trying to stay with the character and tell that character story, because I kind of desperately want to tell you all the different, it's kind of like my mother, when my mother tells a story, she'll say, so do you know Sean O'Neill? And I go, no, I don't. Oh, well, you know Sean O'Neill because he was married on to Josie McEnany. And I go, don't know her either. Well, Josie McEnany had a horse anyway, and the horse was called Seamus, and he was named, and I'm just going, I don't know who these people are, but every single one of them is this huge character in my mother's story. And we go through all the stories of the characters before you come right the whole way back to the main story of the main person, who you've forgotten by the time you get back to them.
And well, so I should ask you a question that's in your book club question list. If you were going to take another character in this book and write the novel from their point of view, whose would it be?
I would really quite like to write the mother. She's a weapon, but she's yeah, I think she doesn't appear as a very sympathetic character, but I think if you got her childhood, or at least the way I see it, I think people would have more sympathy for her.
Yeah. I neglected to ask this earlier, Michelle. Did you want to read a small bit so readers who haven't seen your book yet would get a little flavor?
I can. I know you said a small bit. I've no real. You can stop me. What about that?
I'll wait frantically like this.
Yeah, you can just go. Okay. So I have a bit here, and in the book, Magella has a lot of list items, right? She has a list of things she hates, which is 97 items long, and then a list of things she loves, which is 10 items long. So this is item 1.5 on her good list, which is eating, and the sub item is school dinners. So it's, as usual, this is set in the chipper, and Magella's just doing her job. So Lizzie Breen came into the chipper. Magella always felt a bit flustered when Lizzie Breen was in. She remembered Lizzie from school days when she was the head cook in the canteen. She'd been a giant of a woman back then, armed with a monstrous ladle. Now she was a croil of a thing, shrunken down and curled over on herself. "Hello, Mrs. Breen." "Hello." Lizzie glanced sideways at Magella and then up at the board. Magella knew Lizzie didn't remember her. Magella hadn't been a canteen regular because her dad had a factory job, which meant that Magella either had to bring in dinner money or a packed lunch. She'd have a packed lunch the times her mother was grand and they had a chance of a good cooked meal in the evenings, and she'd be given dinner money the times her ma took to her bed and she was under the blankets in the living room. "What can I get you?" "Triple sausage supper, please." Magella wrote the order down and passed it back, and Lizzie sat down in the windowsill, placed her substantial handbag on her knee. Magella liked how Lizzie always ordered a good supper when she was in. She didn't look like she subsisted off packed lunches, which Magella had always thought were shite. Her lunches were usually a couple of slices of pan and sandwich spread, or jam, or a bit of cheese and pickle, then a penguin biscuit or a fun-sized Mars bar. She could remember the way she'd have her lunch finished off in under a minute and would have to sit there trying not to eye what everyone else was eating. She was always half-starved when she was on the packed lunches. The school dinner was a far better thing, except for the prayers. The master would herd everyone into their seats in the big canteen where Lizzie had been glowering at everybody, her arms folded over her ditties, ready to strike with her ladle. All the other dinner ladies would be kept cackling and shouting at each other in the kitchen behind the big counter, but only Lizzie was allowed out to keep order along with the master. The windows would be running wet from the steam, and the master would be racing around, going red in the face as he tried to get everyone quiet and down. In the name of the John Murphy, I'll kill you if you don't sit down. In the name of the Fionnuala O'Neill, put your knife and fork down and sit like a Christian for once in your life. In the name of the Father and of the Meehan, I'll swing for you if you don't shut up and sit down. They'd hardly finished blessing themselves before everybody tore into their food. It wasn't that it was ever wild tasty, but the portions were generous. A load of spuds and a good dollop of stew or whatever, and they always got a dessert. You had no say over what you got. The food was just put down in front of you, like doughy apple crumble with a wallop of custard or a bowl of half-melted ice cream with watery jelly. Magella loved a good school dinner. Solid food served up by a solid woman. You might fuck with the master, but you never fucked with Lizzie Breen, for you could land up in a pot. I should have given a language warning. Sorry.
It comes with being Irish, I think, already.
Okay.
Okay, I've read other novels with autistic characters, whether they're comic or serious or a mixture of both. But Jelly seems like the most earthy of all the neuroatypical people I've ever read about. She's really in touch with her various hungers and lusts and totally unshy about body part names. Deliberate choice on your part, or that's how it came? Do you do any, there's a phrase for this now, when we seek out people who are experts on being different and ask them to read our stories. Do you do any of that kind of thing, or you just simply had that grasp of the character right away?
No, I'm not. I'm neurodivergent myself, and I have a lot of friends and family relatives as well, close family members who are autistic or neurodivergent. And honestly, it's almost like I'm very familiar with certain kinds of presentations. And I think what's interesting about the presentations of autism is that quite often they are written by people who are not autistic or neurodivergent. And you end up with, I think what you end up with is the observed reality rather than the internal dialogue or the internal experience. And I know myself that the person I seem to be on the outside is quite different to what's happening on the inside. And I think that I can present myself quite well, and perhaps people don't know the complexity, or it's not even the complexity, but the maybe the pain and the anxiety, or the kind of like the way that my mind works internally is very much filtered and very much presented in a neurotypical way, because you know what, people, yeah, you can frighten people if you're too too divergent. So yeah, I think Magella is earthy, but in fairness, I knew quite a lot of women where I grew up who were strong women who were unafraid of their appetites and unafraid of their bodies, and you know, who'd grown up at a time maybe where television and magazines and soap operas had much less influence over your idea of you as a woman and what made you strong or attractive, which I think myself is a really attractive place to be.
Yes. Something I found fascinating about was watching her in this novel, and I'm going to get nerdy on you here as a Star Trek guy. She's a little bit like the Star Trek characters who are analyzing typical human behavior from the outside and figuring out routines that respond. And there's one scene, I won't give it away, but it's near the end. She's in a liaison with a man in the back of the vehicle. And
oh yeah.
he says something metaphorical to her, and her response is, she filed it away for future analysis.
Yeah, because she might have kind of actually got it on an instinctive level, because that, I know the image you're talking about, a flooded pitch, and she may have connected that in a very direct way, but she would analyze it afterwards, kind of go, and that's why that is, yeah. I mean, where I grew up, an awful lot of really fun people said things in very fun ways. I mean, like my mother, if you tried to tell a lie to my mother, she would often say, am I as green as I am? You think I'm as green as I am cabbage looking? And I was like, I have no idea. It took me years and years to figure that one out, you know? Or, you know, I'd say to her, you know, I'd say something like, oh, what do you think? I've tidied my room. It's not messy anymore. And my mother would say something, well, a blind man on a galloping horse would never notice that. And you're like, what? I know that I had to work to parse a lot of the things that I grew up with, you know, and they're really good fun when you figure them out.
Yeah. Now even the name of the chipper is, and I should say this for the non-Irish folks, this is I guess we used to call it a fish and chips place or a chip restaurant, sort of like a diner, fast food diner here. Even the name of the chipper suggests the violence in the background of this community, salt and batter.
Yeah.
And it is a comedy, but the violent history of the place is always lurking around there, it seems.
So I think I think that's very reflective of where I grew up, where violence was very casual. And I say very casual, it's not that it didn't matter. It's not that it caused a lot of pain. It was a huge and horrible part of our lives. But we also used a whole lot of humor to kind of diffuse it in a way. And it never takes away the violence or takes away the pain, but humor just diffuses the situation and somehow makes it a little bit more bearable. And I think that I definitely know the people that I grew up with took a lot of pride in being funny. Do you know, they took a lot of pride in being able to kind of go, this is a shitty situation, but guess what? You know, here's something funny and we're going to laugh at it. And then, wow, you know, it doesn't stop things being awful, but it maybe makes it easier to bear them being awful.
Yeah. So how do you pronounce the name of the town where you placed Magella?
It's called Achibogie, and Achibogie means it kind of, Achi is Irish for field, and bogie is kind of like a swamp or a kind of soft. Basically, it's a sort of swampy. My idea was it was a swampy place, a swampy field where you kind of get sucked down and it's hard to get out.
But its status as a border town, literally with checkpoints, that's very similar to where you grew up.
Yeah, so I grew up in an area of West Tyrone where, you know, when my mum and dad got married, not when they got married, more when they were courting, before the Troubles took off, there were like 19 border roads crisscrossing between Tyrone to Donegal all around. And these roads would have had bridges, and they would have had things like, they would have had shops, they would have had houses on them. And during the Troubles, the British Army blew up 18 of the 19 roads, and they had left us with one approved road in and out of the town on the border side, like as in, you know, crossing over the Republic of Ireland. So, you know, it's a place where you went from having a lot of fluidity and freedom of movement to a place where suddenly you were very much cut off and you were under surveillance when you tried to move around. So it was a pretty, the town I grew up in experienced a lot of violence, and yeah, it was a town that suffered a lot, you know, for all the size of it.
And I should let readers know that if you go to your website on the page for your book, they can download a PDF of the book club kit. It includes an essay by you about growing up as a child of the Troubles. And
yeah,
a great line in there, being born in Northern Ireland meant I was never a part of Generation X, instead I was a child of the Troubles. So what's the area like now?
So it's a lot better. You know, we've had peace money, we've had peace or a ceasefire. It's difficult to know which is which. I think in many ways it's so much better and it's a lot more stable. I think one of the challenges, one of the things that I think hasn't changed and really does need to change is the education system is still entirely segregated. So, you know, my nephews and nieces are now going to the same school I went to, which is a Catholic school, and they then go on to the same secondary schools, which are Catholic schools. which means that their social circle, their religious circle, everything around them essentially is segregated. And I know that things are a lot easier and less terrible than they were, but I think this idea that if we don't integrate the schooling, if we don't integrate the schools, then I'm not sure how long it will take to integrate society, really. So yes, things are loads better, but if you have, it's fair enough to go to separate churches, that's fine, that's your thing. But segregating the schooling and having housing that ended up being segregated because of the violence, it's very hard to suddenly say, well, we've got these housing estates and we're suddenly going to tell everybody to, change houses so we can mix you up. But we can change the schools, and we could change the schools quite quickly. So that to me is a sticking point right across Northern Ireland, not just where I grew up, it's the whole of the North.
All right, forgive me for using a bad word with you here today, but since you're discussing that, as an American of Irish heritage, one of my big fears about Brexit is reestablishing a hard border or reigniting tension on that border. I mean, how do you see what's going on there right now affecting the Ireland?
I think there was a whole period there where it got very frightening, the thought of going back to a hard border. And for people who don't know what that means, at the moment in Ireland, you can drive from Donegal to Tyrone or from Armagh into the south without being stopped at a checkpoint by the British, essentially. And that just means that the border becomes something that's less of a problem. People cross more easily. It's easier to conduct business. It's easier to, stay in touch with your family. It's just easier. And one of the big challenges of Brexit is the fact that the UK is leaving the EU, and now a land border exists between, it's almost like Northern Ireland is Canada and the Republic of Ireland is the US. Suddenly we have a border that matters again politically. I mean, not that it ever stopped mattering politically, but what I mean is it's a security and a legislative nightmare. They seem to have come to some sort of agreement. I haven't, again, this happened on Christmas Eve, and I was like, I can't read this 1,500-page document on Christmas Eve about Brexit. But what I'm interested in is something as simple, but if you can think about COVID and there is a pandemic, what's really interesting to me is how the infection rate and the death rate in Northern Ireland is much higher, much significantly higher than it is in the Republic of Ireland. Now, we as a people in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, broadly speaking, we're the same. Our DNA is roughly the same. There's no great difference on a genetic level between Northern Irish people and Southern Irish. So the difference in how the virus has affected people in Northern Ireland versus the Republic of Ireland is a result of possibly of post-conflict trauma, but more likely it's governance, is how the government is not taking charge of the situation. It's how the hospitals aren't being managed well. And I just think it's really interesting to have the same gene pool in two different Petri dishes almost, and just see the differences in health, in outcomes, in wealth, and in happiness, It makes me sad.
It's unfortunate that the people in the North have to be part of that experiment that they didn't sign up for.
Well, some did. I mean, that's why it's complicated. It's like some people really want to be part of the UK and really believe in it, and other people don't. And I think there's almost like there's this tension between that. And for me, it's almost like, can we step back from worrying about flags and politics and actually look at, if you prioritized health and happiness, what would we choose as a people? And I think politics so rarely thinks about happiness or health. It thinks about power, and it thinks about symbols, and it thinks about waving flags, and doesn't think, how can we create something that's good for our planet and good for our the human race, and leaves everything better than when we started off.
Now, we as Americans can be proud that Magella has picked the cream of American culture as her escape. I'm talking here about Dallas. So is that the author sticking one of her favorites into the book here, or how did Dallas?
Well, I wouldn't, well, look, Dallas was massive when I was a kid. And, we didn't miss it. And when I was really quite little when Dallas came out, and I really thought Americans did, like, I went to America when I was 13. I was put on a flight with my sister, and my mom sent us to America to see what life was like outside of the Troubles. And I was pretty sure it was going to be somewhat like Dallas. And I was so shocked. Upstate New York, Albany was nothing like Dallas, Texas, and nobody had a cowboy hat on, and they weren't drinking cocktails all the time, and with the shoulder pads. Yeah, no, I loved Dallas. It was brilliant.
One of our listeners today wanted to know, she complimented your portrayal of Magella as a big girl, big woman. Wanted to know how you got inside the head of a big person like that.
I don't know, because I'm quite small, and I've always been, if not the smallest person in the room, certainly not the person that you'd pick for a wrestling match. But I know that when I was writing it, I had a really strong sense of, I think I've always been drawn to strong women. And I mean physically strong women who look like they could take care of you, and take care of you physically, as in, just women who would be able to farm or fight or give you a hug. I kind of like that combination. And I found the whole time I was in her head, I felt really convinced by it. I really liked being in that space where I felt, there's a scene where Magella physically defends her mother against a man. And, I haven't a mission of doing that. I might, get a lashing, but I'm never going to be fit for it. And I love the idea of a strong woman, and a woman who likes her strength,
Yes, yes. So your publisher is encouraging book groups for Big Girl, Small Town. And I'm wondering what your experience with book groups is like. Are you a book group person? What do you want from a book group? How does that go?
So I joined a book group for the first time about 18 months ago. So I got to go to about 6 of them before the pandemic hit. So of course, the month they were supposed to read my book, that's when they canceled the book group, and we haven't met since. But I don't know. So I've never been in a book group. I've been in writers groups. And so I went to the book group anyway, and I thought, right, so I'd read the book and I formed my opinions, and I'd read, the reading list questions. And then I went to the reading group and the book group, and we just drank wine. We drank wine for, I think, 2.5 hours, and we talked about the book for maybe 10 minutes, and then we drank more wine, and then I had to write to my editor the next day to go, so I went to a book group and this happened. And I was like, it should really be called a wine group. And she said, no, as far as she knew, that it was actually pretty common for book groups to be more about wine than books. So yeah.
It'll be different with your book. They'll be laughing while they're drinking the wine.
Oh God, yeah. So yeah, I don't know a lot about book groups. I had to join in. I've joined in a few virtual book groups like this, where people have read the book and they have questions. Mm-hmm. But I haven't actually. I haven't a great deal of experience in book groups, because I tend to read tons, but I read on my own. And what I would kind of really like is if somebody could create some sort of app where anybody who's reading a book, not like Goodreads, because Goodreads is a bit asynchronous, but something synchronous where you could say, hey, I'm reading, I don't know, Ripley Bogle, and then anybody else who's reading the book at the same time as you on the planet, you could kind of just all bond over it, because that would be really cool to see what somebody in America thinks of the same book that you're reading in Dublin, and somebody who's in, I don't know, Petersburg is reading it as well. It would be so interesting to see how different minds take on a book.
Now, don't you work in the tech world too, Michelle? Can't you make that happen for us here, that app?
So every time I pitch one of my book ideas to my VC friend who, did fund one of my tech things once, he's just like, nope, nope, nope. He's like, and he loves books. He's a massive reader. And every time I'm like, oh my God, I have this great idea. And then I pitch it, and then he's like, no. So...
All right, let's talk about reading. And before we get to contemporary reading, when you were a younger person, what were the books that mattered to you?
Oh, the books I could actually get. I mean, you have to remember I grew up I grew up way before there was the internet. And
Yeah.
I mean, I read what my mum had. So I have a great memory of reading Down All the Days by Christy Brown, which was, he's an Irish author who had, what was it? He was, oh, I forget, cerebral palsy he had. So he basically spent much of his life not even speaking, and then learned that he could use his left foot and wrote an entire book and painted with his left foot and had a tremendous life, a difficult but stunning life. I can remember, I read everything in our local library. We did a little library in the town, and I read everything by the time I was 10, and then my mum had to take out books for me, but they were, I mean, I loved Stephen King and James Herbert. I can remember reading Catherine Cookson, like it felt like I was pulling my own teeth out. I could not take to that. I actually like things that were quite kind of horror or, you know, fast paced. So I read a lot of Walter Mackin. I don't know if anybody remembers Walter Mackin these days, but Walter Mackin was a big Irish writer back when my mum would have been a student, and she had his entire collection, and I read all of him. But I can remember when somebody gave me Ripley Bogle as the first time I read a book set in Northern Ireland that was really just anarchic and, you know, violent, and it just felt like this book was saying it as the author saw it. So from there on in, I really saw a place for writing Northern Irish fiction that was quite different to the kind of Maeve Binchy stuff that I'd read down south. But yeah. I've read so much. I'm trying to even think. I'm trying to latch on to what else really mattered to me when I was growing up. Basically, if you gave me a book, I read it. You know, I was so hungry for books, and we didn't have a lot.
Now we're going to make you a temporary employee of Daniel and a bookseller here. For people who don't know about Milkman, why should they read Milkman?
Oh, so I'm not convinced you should read it. I think what you should do is buy the book and have the audiobook and experience it that way. One of the interesting things I've found about Milkman is people from Northern Ireland who read it and commented to me, they all think it's really funny. It is dark, but everybody thinks it's really funny when you're from Northern Ireland. People down south in the Republic of Ireland seemed a little bit more frightened to laugh at it. And I was trying to figure it out, and I was like, oh, well, I suppose if you don't know that kind of humor, if you don't know that coping mechanism, you may be a bit frightened. But apparently, if you listen to the audiobook version, either Anna Burns' own version or the actress, I can't remember her name right now, it's really funny because the narrator is giving you permission to laugh. You know, they're really kind of giving you, you know, when it's okay to laugh, and you'll know when it's somber. And I think that's a really important thing. I think Anna Burns' Milkman is one of the best books I've ever read in my life. You know, it took me months to read it because it kept triggering things. It wasn't easy to read because she'd write a paragraph and then you'd be plunged back into something you don't want to think about. So for me, it took a long time to kind of let that book in.
Yes. Sometimes when you talk about being Northern Irish, it sounds like everybody from there must be living with PTSD, basically, going forward.
Yeah, I don't think it. So this is difficult. I've met people who had lovely childhoods who were completely unaffected by the Troubles, and that kind of still astonishes me. In part, I'd really like to analyze it deeper and just find out, are you just fooling yourself? I think PTSD must be widespread, and I know that the world prevalence of autism, for example, is 1 in 200 throughout the world. It's something like 1 in 100 in the Republic of Ireland, and it's 1 in 36 in Northern Ireland. And they think that there's a tie between, you know, the trauma during the conflict and the high rate of autism in Northern Ireland. Or indeed, it could actually just be PTSD being misdiagnosed. We're not really great at mental health or figuring things out really at the moment, I think. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to see when people talk about things and when they stop talking about things. My grandfather, who was a British soldier, went through the Second World War, and he was captured in Dunkirk and spent 5 years in a prisoner of war camp. And when he came back, his wife said, I don't want you talking about it. You don't talk about it. The war didn't happen. And up until the point she died when I was 7, he just never mentioned 5 years in a prisoner of war camp. Didn't happen. And then after she died, he didn't stop talking about it. And he had this amazing stories of, you know, how he was captured, the march to Poland from France, you know, 5 years of captivity and escaping a prisoner of war camp and making it back to Germany, where they got, you know, liberated by Allied troops. And I can remember, like, so my own father now, my dad's in his mid-70s, late 70s, and he was involved in civil rights and civil resistance. And I try and ask him about his experiences, and he doesn't talk all that much. And I said, well, do you have any notes? Do you have anything written down from those days? And he's like, well, we had to burn all our notes. We had to burn everything because we didn't want to incriminate ourselves. And, you know, my uncle, like a couple of my uncles are dead now. And there's this generation, you know, who knew things before the Troubles and at the start of the Troubles and after the Troubles. Whereas I only knew the Troubles. Like I was born in them. They were normal to me. That's just how it was. And then I left. But I'm really interested in the stories that this generation who are getting quite old really could tell us.
Yes. And that reminds me, that readers who haven't read your book yet, you do include how the North is changing with Eastern Europeans moving into it. And there's a Polish lad working in Chipper.
Johan Paul.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Patrick, our co-host, was wondering, he says, I love the characters who were customers of the Chipper. Will there be a sequel?
Okay, so I had no interest in a sequel. I wanted to leave things the way they were because the world is never neat. But when I finished I finished the first draft of my second novel about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, and I'd had like no sleep, and I wrote the last scene of this first draft anyway, or the final bit of it, and put it in, and like I just knew it was finished. It was actually a complete thing that I could now work with. But I said, oh my God, I'm so tired, I'm going to go to bed to sleep. And I went to bed that night and could not sleep. And the whole of a sequel for Big Girl Small Town just rolled in my head like a movie. I could see it from start to finish. So then I had to get up and write that down. It's not a novel. I just had to write down what happened. I just think it's really interesting because I had no idea that I was processing anything to do with a sequel. And yet the minute I finished the last scene of this other book, then suddenly it's like movie time in my head. So I don't know if I can write it or not, but I can certainly see the whole thing.
Margaret, one of our readers, would like to know, why is Magella so loyal to her mother?
Family, clan. And the smaller your clan is, the more loyal you have to be. Like I have a huge clan. There's so many of us, right? Like I don't even know how many first cousins I have. Like, you know, I think the smaller your clan is, and Magella is at a shrinking clan, right? Then the tighter you have to be with the people, even if they are terrible. And I also do think Magella has an inkling that her mom's life has, that things haven't been easy for her mom as well, you know?
And Daniel may want to get his pen out for this one, but what have you read this year that you liked and would like to recommend to readers here today?
Oh boy. You see, the thing is, I always have a list, and then when I'm asked this, my brain falls apart. I think, let me think. There are several books, but I read really eclectically, and I read often quite dark things. So I think the darkest and best book I read was The Discomfort of Evening. And I can't remember the author's name, but it was longlisted for the Man Booker. And it's translated from the Dutch. And it's a very dark story about a girl living on a farm in the aftermath of her brother's death. But it's just incredibly atmospheric. I really enjoyed an Irish book called Hungry Paul. Yeah. Is it Leonard and Hungry Paul? And
it's Leonard and Hungry Paul. I just finished it. I love it so much. All right, I'm going back to mute now.
It's so great. I had seen this going around and around on Twitter, and actually I'm not great with really positive, upbeat books. And yeah, I honestly, I read that book and I felt like I was a little Victorian orphan, you know, with my nose pressed against the window, looking in the sort of a Charles Dickens party. It's a really beautiful book and it's very low key. Oh my gosh, I have so many books, and yeah, I'm put in the spot, but definitely those two. And oh, hang on, do you know what? I'm gonna have to check because I'm always talking my way through. Oh, I read The Dutch House by Anne Patchett as well, and I really enjoyed that one. It was one that stood out to me. It just put me in a different world. And okay, another one I've just read, but it's for the second time because I saw the Netflix series of Rebecca, and I'd read Rebecca years ago by Daphne du Maurier, and I just thought, do you know what? I need to read it again. And I read it again and I just thought I still think it's a stunning novel. It's really great. And do you need more books? I probably do have more recommendations.
I just wanted to say that Daniel is best buddies with Anne Patchett. She came to him for advice on opening her bookstore. So
oh, stop.
He's like a patron saint of bookselling in America now. So
well, wow. So actually one other book that I do, it won the Goldsmith Prize there, and it's called The Sunken Lands Begin to Rise Again. And if anybody's interested in Brexit Britain, I just thought this book is a really interesting, non-political reading of Brexit Britain. The Sunken Lands Begin to Rise Again by somebody called Anthony, what was his name? Can't remember. I'm sorry. You know what, it is actually my bedtime oh, here. John Harrison, The Sunken Lands Begin to Rise Again. I loved it because I think it's a commentary on Brexit, and I managed to read the whole book and not spot anyone who wasn't white and English in it, which I think is a huge comment and a very difficult thing to do because I've lived in London, I've lived in England, and it's a really multicultural society. So I think this book is a really fascinating. It's just a great experience. I really enjoyed the experience of reading the book. You know.
Michelle, where else can people here read your writing? What else is available for people to read?
Oh, for reading, not much. I have this book, and I actually don't have a lot out. I have this book. I finished my second one, and we're going to be pitching it to a publisher next January, which is like a few days away. I have actually written a lot. I just haven't published a lot. So, yeah. That's interesting. Why have I not published as much as I've written? I'll have to ask people, my publishers.
You're building up the excitement for the next book, which we'll be waiting for. Anything I should have asked you today and didn't, or any message you want to communicate to readers here?
Oh no, it's just that I would really love to be over. I've always enjoyed being in America, and it feels really strange to me that Magella, who has never left her small town, is out and about in bookshops in America, and here I am in lockdown in Ireland, and I don't get out anywhere or see anyone or do anything. It is a really weird scenario to be, you know. I mean, I know I'm in Donegal right now, but I will be going back into a 5K lockdown, you know, in Dublin. And yeah, my book is in America and I'm not.
Well, I look forward someday to meeting you here in America. And Daniel, the mic is yours here, sir.
Oh, well, I just wanted to say that you're here. You're here in New York. But
the issue is we can't all now go to the pub and somebody can, you know, play the fiddle and then we get to sing. We're actually all now. I'm gonna have to go and make sure that the kitchen's tidy and, you know, that the bins are out. It's not the same experience, really, at the end of the day.
well, Patrick, I'm sure if he was on would say, oh, well, then you have to come back when we have Irish Fest and come to the literary tent and sign all day.
But
so,
I knew of all of this before. And as a matter of fact, years ago when I ran an Irish language website, we used to get tons of hits from Milwaukee and I never quite understood it. But yeah, there's a big Irish connection and an Irish language connection as well, which is even deeper, you know?
Yeah, a lot of Irish dancing too.
Yeah.
So, well, what an evening. I have to say our book club read The Milkman, and we could have used you to join us because then there would have been more wine. This has been an obsession to me, the Leonard and Hungry Paul thing. It's like I'm
good.
working so hard to get an event with him, and our sales were pretty minimal. I actually know the people I know actually every single person who bought the book, and I thought, oh, I can sell a ton of this, but I have to first put it together. So if you happen to run into Ronan on this, you know,
I've never met him, but I talked to him on Twitter. He's very accessible on Twitter. He's the sweetest person.
I know. I'm not so good at social media, but one of my friends who also loved the book has been following him, and he's a delight.
He's so nice, because I had to write an article. It was terrifying. I had to write an article, and I needed to mention his book, and I had some questions, and I emailed him randomly, like as a randomer who knows nothing, and he wrote me the most intelligent and compassionate reply. And then, like, I swear to God, I was nearly weeping reading his email, never mind his book. And he just seems to be incredibly wise and gentle and smart. It's a really lovely combination, you know?
It really is. I was completely blown away. But I just want to say I was completely blown away by your book too. I do not want to make any less light of this.
Mine's a bit more bawdy and a bit rougher, though. I mean, Leonard and Hungry Bull is very, yeah.
Together, they're a complete package of life.
They are. Well, you know, they represent different facets of Ireland, you know. We have all these different, you know, it's not all Molly Malone and, yeah, pints of Guinness.
I have to tell you, I had the greatest craving for deep fried breaded sausage after the book. I was just like, I don't even know there was such a thing.
My poor husband, my poor French Moroccan husband, I had him, our lockdown went from, I think, to 5K to 10K, or no, 5K. So basically we were allowed to go to the beach, and to celebrate, we stopped off for fish and chips and drove to the beach, and he ordered a battered burger. I don't know, like a battered, like, I know, and, you know, he's lived in Ireland for years and somehow not had a batter burger. And, you know, I have this picture of him biting it, and it's just misery, right? He's the sort of French man who's just like, really? This is a batter burger? And you can't explain to him how they happened, except the weather's colder here, and, you know, you need more calories, and, you know, batter burgers, maybe. Okay. I can see the Virgin Mary behind me in this rental house. There's the Virgin Mary is just sitting there, like, just hanging out, saying hi. It's not my house. This is a holiday home. I inherited her with my holiday home.
But the Virgin Mary is singing, really? Badger burger?
And the infant child of Prague also sitting up there, and a thatched cottage. There you go. That's what you can rent in Ireland at New Year. Anyway, nice, guys, you're trying to get rid of me. We should stop. This is the point where you'd be steering me out the door saying, come on, Michelle, there's somebody with a fiddle down the street, okay?
Jim, thank you so much for a wonderful afternoon. So that said, have a wonderful, well, good night, Michelle. And for the rest of you, have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy our first major snowfall.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Michelle.